Thierry Dubois from Aviation Week. Did you have cancellations of orders? And did you bring down the number of Rafales delivered in the first half of the year? You mentioned a total of 7 for India and Qatar. Would it have been more without COVID? The answer, well, on the cancellations of orders, the answer is no. What our clients have been doing, they've been paying down payments. When they have certain difficulties or they're afraid of the future, they postpone. For the moment, unlike the 2008 recession, orders were cancelled quite a lot around then. No, we haven't had cancellations of orders. I'm not saying we won't have any, but in the first half of the year, we didn't have any. And therefore, the figure of 5 is net orders. So, but there have been some postponements of deliveries. People will collect their aircraft just next year as opposed to collecting them this year. On the Rafale, well, we're on track. We didn't give guidance in terms of deliveries for the half year, so I can't really tell you if it'll be more or less. Obviously, work was slowed down a bit by the COVID crisis, but we'll be delivering our 13 for the year, so we'll have managed to stick to our course, more or less, and our forecast. And our schedule, it was mainly India we were aiming at because they really wanted the planes to be transferred to India in the near future, and that's next week it'll be happening, actually.
Good afternoon, Jean-Marc Tanguy, Independent. Aren't you disappointed because you weren't concerned by the military section of the recovery plan, which was announced a few weeks ago by the Minister of Armies, the military section? Do you expect something from the recovery plan, which is going to be announced in September? They'll have a new military section. You must have read this parliamentary report where they're talking about the possibility of ordering a certain number of Rafale for the Navy and the Air Force. So are those the ones you talked about earlier on, or are there more? And out of the 7 Albatros, out of the 13, do you think that we can accelerate the rhythm of this program, knowing that you could be concerned by cancellations of Falcon 2000, which are the section of the Albatros? And the same question for Archange, which is concerned by the Falcon 8X cell. So a lot of questions from the aeronautical point of view. What we had done upon the request of the DGA is to prepare ourselves to set up programs and anticipate things, because it was out of question to create new programs only to supply or to anticipate recovery. In this anticipation, the Ministry of Armies decided that it would be according to the French military program law, and according to the budgets saved, they would be able to anticipate a certain number of things, but the range, as the minister said, would be around 800 million euros, 600 directly allotted to programs. Now, the Rafale, if you take 12 aircraft, that is much above these sums, so it could not be part of this first envelope. So disappointed or not? Well, we're always disappointed if we don't get the result we hope for, but this envelope didn't allow for this. Now, the second section is this recovery plan. I'd like to remind you that for the profession in general, that the defense activities for the defense industry, this is economic stabilizer for our societies, not only for the major clients, but for the entire supply chain. This entire supply chain and the clients are highly regional. And this net sales, these orders in defense will be mainly for France. Here we cannot talk about relocation. These these are for locations in France. So this is fundamental for the entire profession. I just have to make a nuance because the profession is concerned. I am too. Exports will be deferred. You know that our model, economic model, is based not only on the state's orders, but it's also based on exports. So it is absolutely necessary to have export contracts. That is true for Rafales and for all kinds of defense programs. So we can believe that with the COVID crisis, that there will be some delay in general, and we will certainly see this in 2020. 2020 will not be a record year in terms of export orders. So that's one thing. Now, to precisely answer your question on the Rafale, as the minister said on the day of the announcement of the air support plan, there are discussions that go back to before the health crisis on an additional batch of Rafale. There's a fifth batch, which is in the French military program law, and it goes slightly further. So we're discussing several options with the defense minister. I cannot tell you much more today. Any additional batch is, of course, welcome for us. Any new export contract will also be welcome. So we're working on both. We're not saying one instead of the other. We hope both, and we hope that we will have more orders and more deliveries from 2025 onwards.
Donc,
On the Falcons, Archange, well, there were two. We'd like to have a third, but it's done as an option. It'll just have to be committed, and we'll see. I'll let the parties concerned see if the option is going to be activated or not. But anyway, the defense people. But the third Falcon order should come in as part of the program. Regarding the Albatros program, we should start off with 7. The National Navy has additional needs that could go as far as 12 or 13. If the order is placed earlier, well and good. If the need exists, it'll come in sooner or later anyway. So the Falcon 2000s are being sold. There was no cancellation of Falcon 2000s, so up to date. And any earlier orders would be welcome, but we would like to get in the Rafale orders. Pierre Tran is my name. What about your profit forecasts? Have you got any guidance regarding your profit? Your profit, the net profit, I mean. No, we don't usually disclose that, as you know, I'm sure. What about your sales forecast then? Guidance? Well, it'll be down compared to last year. I can tell you that. It's nothing new, I'm sure, to your ears. You would have guessed that. Well, what about the deliveries then? You mentioned next week deliveries of Rafales to India. How many Rafales will go to India, and what will be the financial impact, please? Deliveries have been done. The ones that were supposed to be done have been done. Next week, it's the airplanes that are being transported to India. So there'll be a press release issued and so on. We'll tell you how many airplanes will have taken off from Mérignac. 6, is it? Well, you see, you'll hear when the time comes. Well, I would like to say the Indians remain present throughout the COVID period. We managed to maintain, with ad hoc measures, maintain the training of the pilots and the mechanics during the whole period to enable the full delivery to take place. And we had technical assistance provided to the Indians to do the handover. You know how difficult things have been in India. The virus is really very active in India, as you know.
Are you very concerned about the survival of your suppliers? Well, at one point, we were wondering about all this. Actually, there will be several waves. The first wave was Well, liquidity, liquidity, liquidity. The state acted immediately with guaranteed loans to cover the liquidity issues for some of our suppliers who don't have a lot of cash. And it's quite pleasant to have a lot of cash when there's a crisis, you know. It's good to for your own support. So the first measures of the state towards the supply chain were these guaranteed loans. Now these guaranteed loans, you'll have to refund them. So there'll be other waves coming behind. And then the drop in activity all of a sudden decided because of the quasi-total stopping of the activity and Airbus and Safran had to drastically reduce deliveries. When I talk about deliveries, these means deliveries of planes, but deliveries for suppliers towards themselves. So furloughing allowed us to help these companies that were in major difficulty. So that was the first wave. The second wave that is arriving is this drop in activity, which is going to last. And since it's going to last, well, we have to be able to support it. So we pleaded a lot for long-term furloughing. So this was set up by the state, and it was discussed with the trade union organizations in all the different divisions. And the supply chain will therefore be able to prepare for the future, so long as there is a resuming of the activity. So that was the second wave. The third wave, which is the most important one and which is the longest, when there will be a recovery, when there will be sales of commercial planes or Falcons again, this supply chain will have to be even stronger than it was before. It has to become more modern. It has to upgrade. And in order to do so, it needs to have funds so as to help its capital, so that there can be a matching sum, so that they might have equity to allow for this upgrading, or there has to be help from the state in the framework of the support plan to revamp. And the calling here is to have more environmental aircraft that consume less energy, etc., and be able to upgrade the digital systems, because our supply chains and clients, we have to pursue our integration with the new digital tools. We saw it during the crisis. It's the digital that allowed us to pursue our activity. So this data battle with the tools must be won in the major companies with the supply chain, and the funds will help. We're creating this supply chain. It is underway. We've selected a fund as a priority, and the negotiations are taking place, and they're going to be completed. And this operational fund should be ready by the end of this month or at the beginning of August. But this is underway, and this fund, it's the four partners that will provide 200 million euros. The state via BPI will also provide 200 million, and the fund we've chosen will also put in a certain amount, and together we will raise funds, private investment funds, so that we have a good and substantial envelope. And the GIFAS provided with the task force a mapping of all the companies in difficulty in this supply chain. So we have the identification of all the issues, and we have a tool that should help us normally meet the needs of these companies. And of course, there'll be several compartments, one to help the technological companies and one to help consolidation, if that is wished by the companies, so that they can consolidate in all these different areas, and the fund will be there to meet all these needs for SMEs.
Yes, I'm from AFP. I have a question, please. Are you going to use furlough measures in the longer term, and to what extent? And what will have been the crisis impact on your research and development expenditure for the future? Well, in the slides I showed you, says Mr. Trappier, you'll see we've maintained the self-funding of research and development for the development of the future Falcon range, 6X and NX, that we didn't talk about today. But you see the self-funding, as you saw on the slide, it's running at a high level, remaining at a high level, because we're hoping that when we exit from this crisis, whether it be in 6 months or in 2022, whenever, you'll need new aircraft, and we'll be around to provide them. We don't want to drop our guard. We want to, make the necessary efforts. It'll cost us something out of our margin, but the board of directors has decided to do this. We want to upgrade our range in a difficult period. It is true, but it's become key, it's become essential. So we have to upgrade our industrial tooling, and it's the same thing there. We're halfway through it now. We've a lot of work streams up and running in our manufacturing plants, as you know, and obviously some matters have been postponed because for the last 3 or 4 months certain things couldn't be done. But the third main work stream then is digital, and we've got to reschedule certain things time-wise, cost-wise. We might spend a little bit less here or there, but we're not slackening in our ambitions to have digital tools we will need in the future. We're working with our friends in Dassault Systems so as to put together those new tools for future development needs. And when I say future development, I'm thinking of the aircraft that are currently being developed, but also production-wise. Don't forget, digital tools will be part of our means of production as well, because the key is to manage data so as to manage the company well. So we shouldn't drop our guard in terms of this kind of spending. So self-funding, R&D, industrial investments, physical investments, we'll be maintaining our efforts there. Won't make a lot of savings, but at times like this, it's not maybe the right time to start saving if you want to get out of the crisis. So you'll see that in the figures even better at the end of the year, I think. Oh, the long-term furlough. Yeah, we'll be using that possibility. I can't tell you to what extent. We're still halfway through the process between the Falcon ordering that should pick up again, and then the talks on the Rafale going on. We'll adapt accordingly. When we've more visibility over the future, we've best case scenario, worst case scenario, we've got simulations and projections that we've been doing. We have work for 2020. We think it's the years thereafter. We'll have to see what the workload will be in those coming years, and the need for a labour force, the need to use part-time working arrangements for the coming number of months or years so as to come back to resumption of a more normal business volume later on. We're still working this out totally transparently with the trade union organizations in the company.
I'd like to go back to the SCAF. So has it been signed finally? And what is the role of this European aircraft? What is the role of the European Defence Agency in all this? And are there other partners in front of the door, or are you going to stick to the 3 you already have? So first, you should never say never. So I don't know if there won't be some new partners in the future. We must not exclude them. It is a program that will take a lot of time. It is ambitious, and we're not going to exclude that. However, to come up with a result, and the result is to be able to deliver combat aircraft, remote carriers, as we say, and engines, and a ad hoc system for 2040, we mustn't waste any time. And so as not to waste time, we have to organize this cooperation today. This is what we're doing with our German partners, and we have to learn to work well together. And this is what we're doing. And this is not only Dassault and Airbus, but a certain number of companies in Germany and a certain number of companies in France. We have to get to know each other and share our work together. And we've decided, since this was the will of the two states to make space for the Spanish who've joined the program. So we're already 3. Now, if we change partners every 6 months, I can tell you that we will not reach 2040. So what is important is to properly design this program. Then we can see we can accept new partners. But the architecture of the program, that has to be done now. So is it European when there are 3 European countries? For me, it is yes. Now, a European project, do we have to be 27? I don't think so, because we cannot manage, except for some projects that are directly steered by the Commission. But in the field of defense, it's the different states that have the upper hand.
Hello, I'm from Capital. On the FCS, have you any comments to make on the fact that the Tempest and the FCS seem to be incompatible, as was said recently? And any further details about the FCAS? Well, we should never say never. But in 2020, 2021, 2022, there's no doubt but that there won't be a merger of FCS and Tempest. If we were to see that, we'd have to reset to 0 and go back 2 years. So there'd be a British partner that would have ambitions. And for the moment, there's a FCS project, one FCS project. I can't say about the Tempest one, how it's funded or anything, or ambitions or programs for that. All I know about is the FCAS. I can talk about the NGF within FCS, of course, and that's progressing nicely. It's never as fast as you want it to be, of course, but the time we're spending at the moment in building it up, I think, is important to build up the trust we need to bring us all to fruition with this. So I'm happy the Spanish have joined up. It's brought in people who are really skilled into this, and it was complicated to get them to join up kind of halfway through, but it was feasible. So the senatorial report you mentioned, well, it's got its own ideas on what you're saying, but the result is, firstly, it's existential for the combat aircraft in Europe. Otherwise, we'd all have F-35s in 20 years' time. And secondly, three-party cooperation is what enables us to launch the program. And we need to have a demonstrator flying in 2026. So we don't want to sit around and talk anymore. We've got to just go and do it and design and bear in mind that we want to have that airplane flying in 2026. And we're not ahead of time. 6 years for that kind of ambition to develop a combat aircraft like that is, pretty ambitious.
Good evening. I had 4 questions. The first, to go back to your comment on a hope of a recovery for Falcons. We do see an increase in the number of transactions on the secondary market. Can you tell us more about this optimism on the market? The second question is on the Falcon support. Can you give us an order of magnitude of this drop, and what can you anticipate for the whole fiscal 2020? The third question is on the supply chain, and specifically on your own supply chain. How many suppliers are at risk, are in major difficulty on your own supply chain? And the last question, which is a bit more strategic on the future world, on the business jets. Don't you think that the mix is going to change, that there will be more property share fractioned ownership and fewer jets? I will try not to forget any of your questions. As for the Falcon, well, I am very cautious because I'm worried. I think that the health crisis is starting again. I mean, it's continuing. Here we're talking about starting again, but in the United States, it's not starting again. It's a constant progress of this pandemic. It's not stopping work there, but it is disturbing it, and it is disturbing all the traveling. And if the virus would get slower, I think that business jets, particularly in this environment where there are health risks, I think the business jets will start again because there are fewer people in the aircraft. They can go to airports that are less crowded than big commercial airports. So those who can do that buy pre-owned aircraft or new aircraft. This is done a lot in the United States, and it can be a driver for recovery. But let's be cautious because we still haven't come out of this health issue. I'd like to remind you that in the United States, there is this health issue and there is this economic issue related to this health issue. But you also have elections in the United States, and that is never very good for a recovery of the activity in a delicate context. In Asia, things are more modest. People are flying again with their business jets, of course, but the activity in terms of purchasing new aircraft, that can still be discussed. You know, discussions doesn't mean new contracts. I want my salespeople to come back with contracts rather than having them have a lot of discussions. But the links with our existing clients, with our future clients, is such that there are a lot of discussions underway. And I'd like to go on straight to your last question because it's related to this one. Fractioned aviation is not very easy. It's not an easy model. I'm not sure it's going to develop. We could all believe that it is going to develop, but finally, I don't think that that is really developing. I'm not sure that the NetJet competitors are in good financial health. So it's a difficult market, and I'm not sure that it would really work. But people do want to rent planes. People who buy planes and rent them in companies that are specialized, like we can have at DFS, well, it is something that can be done. But it's a bit early. When we meet again at the beginning of next year, we will be able to better assess this recovery. As for the Falcon support, we're not going to give any figures. It was allotted since the fleet was not flying anymore. The need to buy spare parts, etc., all that went down. The Falcon service stations, the load went down overnight. But it did have an impact on the accounts. As for the supply chain, I must not confuse with what I have with the GFAS. I have two hats and I confuse between the two. There are some 10 companies affected at risk in our direct Falcon supply chain. So we're going to keep an eye on them so that we can support them. And it was much more for the GFAS if you take the Airbus supply chain, Airbus, Safran, etc. And as for the Rafale, well, they are suffering because of the Airbus effect or the Falcon effect. So this is why we need to strengthen our orders in the Rafales so as to balance this loss in the number of orders in civil aviation, not only Falcons, but also Airbus, because a lot of subcontractors in France are Airbus, Falcon, Rafale, etc. And I think that's it. I hope I haven't forgotten anything. Thank you.
La lettre de l'entreprise.
Yeah, I'm from La Lettre de l'Entreprise. You said that the transformation of the company will require you to go digital, especially for the supply chain. What are the new business lines that are emerging now within Dassault Aviation, please, in that regard? Well, the answer, it's not totally new business lines or job lines. It's for conventional job lines, business lines, producing aircraft, taking account of the fact that there are digital tools around. So if I could give you an image, it's like a gardener using this or that kind of fertilizer or soil, and he knows the exposure to the sunlight and so on. But if you give him more professional tools, if you give him something that bores holes better so as to plant plants, he's got to redesign the way in which he does things using different tools, you see. So our engineers are used to designing in a certain way, producing in a certain way, supporting aircraft in a certain way. So it's a question of getting used to different tools. That's why we talk about the extended design office, that the people designing aircraft will be designing aircraft, but designing an aircraft that must be produced and supported and so on down the line, taking account of aerodynamics and materials, and there are all sorts of specialists who take care of those technical areas. But the people designing the aircraft, therefore, must say to themselves, in the choices I'm making, they're architects after all, in the choices I make, I've got to bear in mind that someday this has got to be manufactured as easily as possible at as low cost as possible to make it price competitive, and that it can be supported as easily as possible too. So as to factor in those items at the design stage, to design them in when those planes come to the service stations and so on later on. So when you say things that way, people say, well, that's what we do. But people know it's got to be done, but they don't always do it. And these modern digital tools will enable us to do it more efficiently. It's better plant management, reporting data more efficiently, PLM arrangements. I can advertise 3D experience from Dassault Systems, for example. You can do digital mock-ups, but also simulate manufacturing plants and also model up value chains and do the costing and so on, and get the balance right, make the right decisions if you have all the data to hand. So the idea is to have a digital mock-up of the plane, of its production, of its efficiency, technically speaking, production-wise, and also in terms of cost. So that's where we're going to have to win this data battle. Also protect the data, because obviously we'll have to focus our data in certain clouds that'll be well protected, virtually, physically, and so on. So all of that battle has got to be waged. And we're doing it with the armed forces too, because in the context of the Ravel project to support the Rafales, we have been setting up a cloud between the army and ourselves that'll be secure, that'll take account of the data of the industrialists and of the military people. So we've got to protect these data. We remain owners, by the way, of the data. It's given the US regulations and the European regulations, it's a bit complex, but we've got to retain the ownership of the data. So this is the whole digital revolution that's going on. It's not just our company that's concerned. The data come in from our company, but also from our cooperation partners, from our subcontractors, and so on. And we're doing this with Airbus, for example, in the context of the FCAS program. We are adjusting our tools together, calibrating them together, using 3D experience from Dassault Systems. Airbus recognizes it's a good tool, by the way. So we have to see how we can protect our data from Airbus and Dassault, how we can work together and how we can exchange, and especially how we'll protect ourselves together from outside attacks that don't exist, but that you see on the horizon every day. You know, a lot of cyber attacks go on too in this area.
So it is a major project. Hello, Anuradha Rasha, Times Aerospace. I have a question on business jets. You talked about the American market, which is impacted by the COVID, but according to the analysts, there is a saturation of the long-range jet. That market is saturated. Do you think that there are any prospects for Falcons, especially the 6X, in the Middle East, because it is a buoyant market? And what is your state of mind when you will go to the Dubai show next December? Well, we'll see. As for the air shows, it is really, everything's getting canceled. As for the Middle Eastern market for Falcon, until today, there aren't many business jets in the Middle East. Why? Because traveling is done with all kinds of different environments. They take large aircraft so they can take large delegations, a lot of people, actually. the more this business is going to develop in the Middle East, in all the countries in the Middle East, the better. So we already have some. We have some major clients in the Middle East who are well known, who use business jets. So we believe, more particularly, maybe this is to answer one of the questions I did not answer beforehand, the mid-range. I don't know what is exactly a mid-range, but a 6X, 1,500 nautical. In the Middle East, you can do quite a bit with that. You can go to Asia, you can go to Europe, you can go to the eastern coast with the stopover. You can go right up to the west coast or to South America. So will it be at the expense of the ultra long range? I don't think so. I think there's a market that exists for both. What we're continuing to do is to improve the cabin so the cabin might be an efficient working place. Problems with communication, digital tools, and a nice place to live in, because a lot of the businessmen spend days and nights. For some of them, half of the year they are in an aircraft, so they need a minimum amount of comfort to sleep well and feel well. So we're going to enlarge the cabins. We're going to have something more comfortable when you have a 12-hour flight. So both are going to develop. Both are top of the range. 6X or an ultra long range, and 8X or anything else. These are top of the range aircraft. It isn't mid-range, which are the mid sizes for our friends from other companies. Is there a saturation? I don't think so. I don't think there's a saturation. There is a lot of competition between the 3 or 4 majors in this area, but each one has its own beauty. And I think that when you have fighter aircraft and business jets, this gives you more performance, better performance, more security, more modernity, a better management of all the flights compared to other companies.
Bonjour, Michael.
Hello, Michael Genet from Mission CES. Firstly, thank you for everything you've been doing throughout the crisis, and thank you for your support to your subcontractors, industrial subcontractors that are in extreme difficulties, that don't even know what's going to happen in the future. But you talked about innovation, modernizing, revamping, upgrading, digital, and you mentioned Dassault Systems, your friends, as you said. They have actually made a move. Some years ago, they went to the consumer electronics show in Las Vegas regarding new technologies. Now, what about Dassault Aviation? Via GFAS, maybe? Are you going to go towards that kind of policy, let's say? These big shows, these days we see more and more progress of new technologies. You talked about it yourself when it comes to the developments of carbon neutrality and so on, and the contributions we've all got to make. And this is something that our French president has been asking people to make efforts on. Last week you talked, I think it was last week, you talked about the hydrogen-powered aircraft, new form of energy and new systems there. Do you think that you could provide support to all of those startup companies that are trying to enter this universe, that is the aviation universe, via new technologies? Delta Airlines last year had a prototype that was quite innovative at that event I mentioned. And do you think you might do something similar? In other words, to avoid what's happening for Ariane Espace at the moment, for example, when you look at Tesla from the automotive environment, sending people directly into space, maybe there's something that could be done that would be totally groundbreaking, that would be part of this digital revolution and be a huge piece of innovation and development. Yeah, there's lots to be done. You've put your finger on it, said Mr. Trappier. But to pick up your last point regarding Elon Musk, he operates in the U.S. And that's meaningful to say that. In other words, you can raise private funds more easily than in France, for example, because private funds aren't stigmatized, over there. So that's one thing. Second thing is the U.S. administration can mobilize its efforts if a project is a good project. So when Elon Musk succeeds, thanks to another third point for the U.S., it's mobility of knowledge and know-how. People can be mobilized easily around ideas that are had. You can have a whole family category of launches with totally new digital methods and so on. He mobilized those teams and managed to recruit top-notch engineers from different backgrounds. So because his genius is to be able to mobilize these energies and do this innovation, and he got massive support from NASA, from certain U.S. administrations that helped to provide him with their own know-how too. So it was a win-win situation. Now, can we do that in France? That's the real question that we should ask. Our French president, I think, has been wondering about that kind of thing. But we're not American. We don't have the same culture as they have in the U.S. But what is sure and certain is that in the area of innovation, we've got to move forward. Now, small entities, yes, I agree with you. There are some gold nuggets out there that it would be nice to cultivate. There are incubators that do that. And look at artificial intelligence with Thales. Energies have been harnessed to mobilize a whole ecosystem around what we wish to do for the future. And in the area of innovation, there are funds that are being set up outside of defense and aviation, and that's got to be done. I think it's a question of mindset. You've got to believe in innovation. You've got to believe in industry for a start. Obviously, I would plead myself in favor of industry, being from Dassault, but you've got to believe in your industry. You've got to believe in your industry, your defense industry. You've got to believe in your industry in general. Everybody's saying it, but you've got to go and do it. I'm not saying the state isn't doing it, but it's a state of mind. It's about the mindset, the state of mind that France has got to want to innovate and develop its industry and services. I'm not criticizing services or anything, but industry, because the jobs battle will be important. It's important services too, but you've got to have new business models. You've got to foster your industry and create the jobs there. But if you look at Darien, you mentioned Darien, it's also due to the mobilization of the public players in the U.S. that believe in this, that are ordering things and so on. It's a new model. I don't know if it'll work in France. It's a moot point.
Our president injected some 4 billion euros to help innovation vis-à-vis startups. And in France, we have always, you've created the Rafale. We've created in all kinds of sectors. We are pioneers. We're leaders. Everybody recognizes that about the French. Everybody knows that the French are always complaining. They're never happy. But we are the champions in terms of quality and innovation. So Dassault Aviation, Logifas, you talked about the finance of PPIs for the subcontractors, 200 million. So why shouldn't there be this will to have golden nuggets, to have new golden nuggets, to set up all this and to show what we, the French, don't know what to do is to have an influence because we have a good quality in our products. Dassault System, take an example of Dassault System. It's a very small company. It was very small a few years ago with a few people from Dassault Aviation. And now it has really surged and it's become a major player in industrial software solutions. It's become maybe the major global player. But you need to have people who believe in this. You need to have a project, a business plan, of course. You have to put in money, of course. You have to grow in a business plan. You have to make strategic choices. But we, Dassault Aviation, our problem right now is to prepare for the future. We are highly mobilized for the future aircraft, whether it's a Falcon or the NGF. And our design office is strongly mobilized. It's busy, not to mention all the developmental work. We have a very busy design office. Get the help of certain startups. Yes, we have some experience in that area. Thales also has an incubator. And the answer is yes, we have to do this. But of course, it has to work also. It has to be successful. Sorry, people are talking off mic. The interpreters cannot hear the comments made off mic. Sorry. We are in favor of innovation in any case.
You were talking about the cancellation of trade shows one after the other. What ones would you think would take place this year? Well, wearing my hat as a GFAS person, of course, we'd like people to come to the Bourget Air Show, but in terms of purchase of space and so on, well, people would have to put money on the table if they wanted to make their pre-bookings, and then they might lose the money because COVID mightn't have gone away. So we haven't got much time ahead of us. I mean, you know, we're trying to get things organized for the Bourget Air Show, and you know, business models are long-term ones in these areas because the surface areas are huge for the Bourget trade show, air show. But you know, we don't know. Look at Farnborough, totally digital. You know, in a year's time, we don't know what will happen. A lot of trade shows have been cancelled recently. Look at the naval show. 2 weeks ago, everybody was saying there's no COVID in France anymore. No problem. But if there's a new surge, I read the newspapers like yourselves. You write the articles in the newspapers. So, you know, it's still around, and it'll remain around a bit more after the summer holidays because people will have been moving around and traveling. And will have slackened in their efforts in a way, too. So we don't know. The Bourget Air Show is in a year's time. At the end of the year, the decisions will have to be taken. We'd have to talk about that later on. If it's as it is right now, it might be feasible, but other countries would want to see things the same way. If you hold the Bourget Air Show right now, the Americans won't come. And, you know, certain other countries mightn't come either. And if you go to a trade show, it costs as well. You know, I mean, look at the economic and financial crisis following on the heels of the health crisis. So it costs people to go and attend those, and they might do without it for 1 year. So in GFAS, we're wondering about all this because it's a lot of monies to be committed, and we just don't know how we'd be covered if there were cancellations. So we just don't know yet.
Oui, bonjour. Chloé Lemarnier, BNP Paribas. I have two questions. One on the evolution of R&D. The midterm envelope has remained unchanged. Were you talking about the possible changes? What are the possibilities in 2020 and in the future years? Will the peak be in 2021? And the second question is on defense. You talked about the concern of the industry on the delays in exports. Is it because you have trouble advancing in discussions when you cannot travel, or is it rather an economic issue for the countries? Well, R&D, yes, that's the first question. I'm going to give you an indication. The financials from Dassault are going to get worried. The indication is that we have two programs that we're developing right now. One is the 6X, and the other one is the NX. I haven't said anything about the NX. I did not tell you when it will be operational. But what I can tell you is that in 2022, we'll deliver the 6X. We'll stop the development of the 6X. So the peak is right now because we have two programs at the same time, which is not logical because the plan was to have a 5X delivered in 2017. And then we had this famous NX. So we are over self-funded in R&D because we have two simultaneous programs, which is not really logical. And this will last until 2022 at least. Now, it doesn't give you an idea after 2022, but until 2022, we'll have a high level of development. A new program ramps up, and then until a program reaches maturity, and then it goes down. So two curves. You can carry out your simulations, but you have a certain number of elements missing to have a proper simulation. As for your second question, it was the gap in exports. Well, there are two things there. For 3-4 months, although the phone did work, countries were mobilizing they're fighting against the virus, so it did not accelerate. Then there are economic consequences because of the pandemic. So it's very difficult to say this or this country. Each country has its own issues, and we're not coming out of the crisis in the same way as we've all entered. So we'll have to carry out this analysis. We feel we can carry out the analysis now because France has come out of the crisis, but it's not yet totally over. There are some European recovery plans. It's a new world. We'll have to carry out this analysis in all the countries. It's a bit too early to know, but it is not accelerating this discussion movement in this area. But we will see what the future has to offer. There are just a certain number of countries that are accelerating their discussions when they are European and they're buying American. For them, there's no problem.
Concerning the 13 Rafales to be delivered, how many for India and how many for Qatar, please? We won't give you the details on that. No, we're delivering 13 this year. There's Qatar and India.
Can I ask another question on business jets? We have too many players in that sector. We have a player who is very strong, who is focusing on business jets, Bombardier. He has disposed his train business. So what's your vision about the number of players in this area? Your vision about Bombardier's strategy? I'll try not to answer your question. I'd rather talk about Dassault rather than Bombardier or Embraer.
Concerning the COVID consequences on NGF, you talked about teleworking. Do you think that there was a delay accrued by the program, and how much? Yes, there was a delay, obviously, because we thought we'd have physical platforms. We more or less replaced them using digital tools and so on, replaced them by virtual platforms. But people would have to come in person to work on the spot to go forward faster. Now, between Manching and Saint-Cloud, we've reduced staff. But most of the team would be here in Saint-Cloud, but it's not the size of the team that we'd planned initially. So we'll see how the COVID develops, how the virus develops or what. But the tube for communication that will be secured between ourselves and Airbus and between Manching and Dassault will be made available so that we have capabilities of working in a protected way between states and industrialists. It wasn't really totally provided for. So in the digital revolution that we're going through, you have the major contractors in the supply chain. In defense, you've got to say, and clients. And that's what we're doing ourselves with our military friends in Ravel, exchanging data, very sensitive data, among ourselves. And that'll be, with France and Spain as well, additionally. So we've got to avail of this window of opportunity to put together the right way of working together and have the tools to work properly and efficiently together.
Question SMS.
SMS question from Giovanni Briganti. When was the last offer made for the European MALE drone? The last offer submitted it was today, this morning, actually, from Dassault towards Airbus and from Airbus to OCCAR in the coming hours. That was the latest. There were some other before. But this is normal. This is a negotiation. So the offer is improving, seen from our side or seen from OCCAR. So improving day by day.
Bien, bah écoutez, s'il n'y a pas d'autres...
Well, if there's no other question, I would like to wish you happy holidays if you're going on holidays shortly. Enjoy your holidays, have a good rest, and we'll be ready for new adventures after the summer holidays. Thank you. See you soon.